Let's dive right into this explainer. We're going to explore how we can use ancient philosophy to handle the crushing weight of modern crises. Even the greatest leaders in history were haunted by profound depression, crippling grief, and overwhelming adversity. But today we're going to look at arguably the greatest statesman of all time, Abraham Lincoln, and discover exactly how he used ancient philosophical practices to shoulder the massive burden of a fractured nation without completely losing his mind. If you look around at today's chaotic world, passing through this lamentable mixture of permacrises and paradigmatic breakdowns, it is incredibly easy to feel entirely helpless. And honestly, looking at this comparison when you measure our current crop of highly stressed, angry political leaders against the great, grounded statesmen of the past, well, it often feels like comparing a flock of grubby urban pigeons to a serene bird of paradise. When faced with heavy burdens, we often give in to the madness of anger or let anxiety paralyze us. But the thing is, we don't have to. To stop letting that anxiety paralyze us, we are going to unpack the four-pillar Stoic blueprint Lincoln used to pull a nation back from the brink. 1. The burden of crisis. 2. Wisdom, anticipating the worst. 3. Courage, radical, reaching empathy. 4. Temperance, mastering the madness. 5. Justice, loving your fate. And finally, 6. The sacred effort. Starting off with Section 1, the burden of crisis. Before we can understand Lincoln's tools, we really need to understand the absolute fire he was walking through. I want you to genuinely ask yourself a question. If you were born into soul-sapping poverty with only one single year of formal education, if you were plagued by intense suicidal thoughts, and then you were tasked with leading a country through its bloodiest, most devastating war, do you think you could keep your sanity? I mean, most of us would shatter into a million pieces. But Lincoln didn't. He kept his mind intact, and the way he did it is basically a masterclass in resilience. That brings us to Section 2, wisdom, anticipating the worst. What's truly fascinating about how Lincoln survived is his unique application of this first Stoic virtue. He didn't just hope for the best. While modern society is constantly telling us to just think positive, Lincoln operated completely differently. His mind was essentially a purring production line of worst-case scenarios. He was actively practicing what the ancient Stoics call premeditation malorum, the premeditation of evils. By constantly anticipating worst-case scenarios, he was already mentally prepared for the absolute hardest realities long before they ever actually arrived at his desk. And this brilliantly illustrates the difference between modern political posturing and true leadership. This depressive realism allowed Lincoln to properly assess his doubts and endure some incredibly sobering responsibilities. Because think about it, when things go incredibly wrong, the delusional optimism of a shameless politician is absolutely no match for the sober appraisal of a depressive realist. He didn't hide from the dark facts, He stared right at them so he could actually manage them. All right, Section 3, courage, radical, reaching empathy. Because for a true Stoic, courage isn't just about facing down enemy fire on a battlefield. Lincoln possessed the courage of radical empathy. In Stoic philosophy, there's this ancient concept known as oikiosis. It's a feeling of profound brotherhood and affinity with other living things, a compassion that ripples out way, way beyond yourself, your family, or your immediate tribe. It's basically the courage to truly care about the suffering of others as if it were your own. What makes this so incredibly remarkable is his background. Despite growing up in a brutal, essentially Darwinian battle for survival on the American frontier, Lincoln utterly abhorred cruelty to any living creature. Actually, legend has it he was so traumatized by being forced to kill a wild turkey as a boy that he swore he'd never do it again. That brutal environment didn't harden his heart. Surprisingly, it actually expanded his empathy. And this radical empathy is exactly what fueled his ultimate act of courage. He extended this compassion to fiercely oppose the institution of slavery. He had the courage to care deeply about people he didn't have to care about, at a time in history when it was incredibly dangerous, politically and physically, to do so. That is oikiosis in its most powerful, literal, nation-changing form. Now here is a really startling historical juxtaposition. The man who oversaw America's deadliest conflict was, at his core, a pacifist. He did not want this war. But when angry Southern leaders seceded and precipitated what he called the mighty scourge of war, Lincoln didn't panic. He focused strictly on what he could control. He couldn't control their anger, right? But he could absolutely control his own response. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4, Temperance, Mastering the Madness. This strict focus on control is exactly how Lincoln dealt with anger. Because anger is a form of madness, and when we give into it, we become dangerous. Just think about the crushing weight this guy carried. How does a man burdened with leading a bloody civil war, grieving the tragic death of his own child, enduring multiple business failures, and navigating a completely volcanic political landscape even survive? Antebellum America was releasing a pyroclastic cloud of violence, yet Lincoln was one of the very few who never lost control of his emotions or his mind. So, what was his secret weapon? Well, his shield was humor. Lincoln was famous for his pointed, sometimes fairly ribald stories. When a critic actually chided him for telling jokes during a massive national crisis, Lincoln bluntly replied, "If I could not tell my stories, I would die." Laughter wasn't a distraction for him. It was an absolutely essential temperate release valve that kept him grounded. This temperance reached its absolute peak at the end of the war. Practicing the ultimate dichotomy of control, Lincoln absolutely refused to match fault with fault. When his triumphalist supporters were demanding brutal, vengeful punishment for the defeated South, Lincoln completely shocked them. He demanded charity instead, immortalizing the phrase, "malice toward none and charity for all." He simply wouldn't let the madness of the war infect his own soul. Moving on to Section 5, Justice, Loving Your Fate. That ability to stay pure in his intentions is how he managed to give profound meaning to all this suffering. Lincoln deeply embodied amor fati, which translates to the love of fate. It means embracing whatever destiny puts in your path, even the terrible things, to facilitate growth. He was on intimate terms with suffering, but instead of cursing it, he used his words to frame the bloody war not as mere senseless destruction, but as a delayed act of justice and a necessary spiritual atonement for the nation. He understood down to his bones that crisis, however painful, is an agent of tremendous growth. Life humbled him many, many times, and it was exactly those humblings that matured him from what was once an ego-driven opportunist in his early years into a majestic, towering statesman. The crisis didn't break him, it forged him. And that brings us to our final part, Section 6, the sacred effort. Let's assess his legacy as a whole through this final lens. It is absolutely vital to remember that Stoicism is about continuous improvement, not sudden perfection. Was Lincoln flawless? No. By modern standards, historical records show his early views were flawed and would absolutely be considered white supremacist today. But the true Stoic ideal is about sculpting your own statue every single day. And Lincoln spent every single day improving his character, refining his justice, and expanding his empathy until his very last breath, ultimately realizing Plato's ancient prophecy of a true philosopher-king. This continuous, exhausting self-improvement was beautifully recognized by the great abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Shortly before Lincoln's death, he asked Douglass for his opinion on his second inaugural address. Douglass replied with these unforgettable words, "Mr. Lincoln, that was a sacred effort." He saw the profound philosophical work Lincoln had done not just on the country, but on his own soul. And that, right there, is the true blueprint. To lead yourself through personal crises, you need wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. Here is a final thought to leave you with. If a man carrying the weight of a collapsing nation could find the time to daily sculpt his own soul, what is stopping us? Which of Lincoln's 4 Stoic traits are you going to practice today? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next explainer.